Cool. My name's Dylan. I am here to talk about building a product, specifically building a product with AI. This is going to be a bit of a case study. So I work at a company called Marker, which is a joint venture between some big PR agencies. And these are businesses that have been around for 20 years or so. And so this will be a bit of a case study about building AI and data competency within what is a legacy business in a lot of ways, operates in a very traditional way. First, hands up, does anybody in the room work in the PR communications industry? No? Okay, good. There's going to be a bit of exposition here, so hopefully that is valuable. So first up, who am I? Dylan. My background is in software engineering work and eventually management, and picked up some data stuff just kind of through osmosis, and we'll be talking a bit about that today. Joined this PR agency about 1.5 years ago because they recognized that they needed to level up their AI and data expertise. So I was not from the PR communications world, so I've learned a bunch about what that means, which we'll start off with kind of diving into a bit about that. And I've also been working in this kind of generative AI world for quite a bit. Was lucky enough to work with OpenAI when they launched the API for DALL-E, their first public image model. So we were first out the gate doing like a pre-launch integration with them. And since that moment, I think there's a lot of valid skepticism about AI and the role it will have in the world at large, but I do think there's a lot of very real applications to it. And so, coming into this new industry, this new business, my goal was to figure out how to apply AI in the ways that could be most valuable to this business. And I also live here in Detroit, excited to meet more folks in this area. My company is based in New York, so I spend most of my networking time out there. So happy to see a local event like this. So as I mentioned, I want to start off with what the PR industry is, what the PR industry does. And again, this is, the goals with what I'm going to explain and walk through today are a case study that I hope, even if you're not in the PR communications type world, you can recognize some of these patterns and figure out how these apply to your business as well. So PR is a services business, basically. The product of a PR agency is many, but it's communications, meaning written news content, other types of content, whether it be blog posts or company marketing content, other digital marketing strategies, company strategy, and then the kind of net of all of that is on top building insights and analytics tools to show the companies that are our clients how they're doing in the world, how they're performing, how their communications are being received. And a pretty typical workflow for this is the one on the second point here. So a client comes to us, they say, hey, we want to be in the news for this thing. We want more people to know that we're really good on ESG, or that we have adopted this new hiring practice, or whatever it is. They come to a PR agency, and we start out by doing a lot of research, understanding what it is exactly that they are trying to communicate, how it relates to their competitors, how it relates to their industry as a whole. And then based on that, creating content. And so this could be, a pitch, or it could be a more long-form, fully fleshed out article, some type of thing that we can then try to get in front of the public at large. Creating a media list. So in a case where, we have a client that says, we want to be in the news for this thing, we figure out which reporters, which publications are going to be the ones that are going to be most receptive to that. Pitching, obviously, pitching these reporters, hoping that they will write about our client. Publication, and then at the end of all of this, again, trying to measure the performance. And so, the article goes out there. How many viewers did it get? How much did people internalize the key messages of this? How much is our brand now associated with this thing that we're trying to communicate? And a lot of this feels very fuzzy and manual, and it is. And it's all very relationship driven. A lot of this is a workflow that hasn't fundamentally changed since the inception of the industry. We have new tools. We have spreadsheets and Slack and stuff like that, but the workflow itself hasn't really changed. The not too long ago incarnation of this was PR agencies literally clipping publications out of newspapers and scanning them in and kind of creating reports that way. So really, fundamentally, we're not too far off from that. However, and probably why a lot of us are here today, is we know that the world is changing in a big way. AI and automation are things that are going to be especially disruptive to an industry like communication that is very focused on written content. The main things that are going on inside of a PR agency are reading things and writing things. And those are things that, language models are getting pretty good at. Those are things that I think everybody recognizes that no matter what you feel the time scale is for AI eating the world and taking everybody's jobs, on that list, industries like this one are going to be close to the top. And so we've seen, especially in the last couple of years, a very big investment on that front. So between just 3 of the kind of bigger subset of PR agencies, they've put $1 billion alone in the last year into AI and data. And this is not an area that traditionally they've invested in. This is something that has, again, it's been seen as peripheral to the main goal of the business. It's something that's nice to have, but it's not a must. It's more of a research and development project. All of those are becoming top priority very quickly. The industry itself is also changing. We've seen a decline in traditional news media. We've seen things shifting more towards influencers and creators. So there's also a pressure at the same time on the revenue front. The PR agencies themselves, their business is kind of a trailing effect of how technology businesses are doing. When stocks are down, when the interest rates are lower, then it's a harder time to make investments in tech businesses. So a lot of pressures on the industry, but a lot of them, including, fortunately, the business I work for, is recognizing that some investment in technology and data could help them get over that and succeed. Specifically, at the business I work for, we are over 700 employees around the world. And that is, again, a lot of people doing these tasks I mentioned. So one of the biggest things that we do is what we call coverage analysis. And that is basically, your company has been in the news. Maybe you've launched a new product and you have a bunch of outlets that have written about your product, or maybe there's a scandal or something. For whatever reason, there's a news cycle that includes your company. And so you want to know what's going on, and you task your agency with telling you what's going on. And what we do is a lot of manual work. We have folks manually Googling for coverage every day, all day long, looking through Google News, other kind of news aggregator sources, trying to figure out what's been said, copying and pasting all those titles and URLs and stuff into big spreadsheets, and then reading through every single article, because you don't probably just care about how many articles was my company mentioned in. You probably also care about, if I am OpenAI, how many times was my business mentioned in this article? How many times were my competitors mentioned in this article, how well was I positioned relative to my competitors? You know, was this maybe we launched a big new product, but the article mentions us at the beginning and then, you know, heaps praise upon one of our competitors saying that actually the thing they released last week is better. These are all important metrics for a company that's launching products. And so, again, a very manual human task is reading through every single item of coverage and keeping track of those metrics. And as you can imagine, that is not only manual and difficult, but it's very error prone as well. And then the end result of all of this is building reports. You know, we're not sending 10,000 row spreadsheets to our clients. We're sending them some type of aggregated view into that. So a lot of the time that's written reports. You know, we'll send you a weekly recap email that says, hey, this is what was in the news this week about your business. It can also be dashboards. You know, we build a lot of visualizations of the type of metrics that I was just mentioning. You know, how many times was your business mentioned? What was the sentiment of the mentions of your business? And again, despite advances in the technology that we use for these things, fundamentally this is happening manually. You know, people are compiling this data, they're building bespoke visualizations for this every single time. And it's very siloed, it's very unstructured, and it's taking up a huge amount of time within the business itself. So just to kind of reiterate the point of the fear of disruption, and you know, maybe the business that you're working for is not on the top of this list, but I can pretty much guarantee it's somewhere on this list of what is the media saying about which industries will be disrupted. I'm not a huge fan of the crayon vomit quid graph here, but it does kind of give you a sense of like what is the lay of the land, like what are the industries that folks are most feeling will be changed fundamentally in the next couple of years. And I think, again, like manual work, businesses like ours that do manual written text-based work, this is something that we're worried about. Communications is written communication heavy. It's high on that list. And based on the top 20 investment coverage topics, communications, PR, marketing are 3 of the top 20, and overall account for about 20% of all of the coverage about what AI is going to come and disrupt. So coming into this, I was brought in with a couple of coworkers to try and figure out what we're going to do. You know, very open-ended goal. You know, this is again a business that is not in the mindset of building products. They're not in the mindset of automating their work. They're not in the mindset of creating solutions once that can then run in the background forever. And so we're trying to think about how we're going to approach this problem. This is an investment for this business, as it may be in your business if you're in a similar industry that is not a particularly automated one. And so we need to not only figure out what we're doing pretty quickly and do it, but we also need to deliver business value. You know, we can't just be working on R&D projects that will never actually improve the state of the business. So we kind of came up with these 3 framework points or goals, which I'll get into each in a bit more detail in a second. But embedding ourselves deeply within the team to understand what's going on and how we can best address it. Setting defensible goals, and I'll talk a bit more about what that means. And then kind of the classic agile startup advice, you know, shipping quickly and repeating. So first up, embedding deeply within the business. What do I mean by that? So one of the first questions we had, both for ourselves and for those who worked at this business, was what are people actually spending their time on? You know, we looked in the previous slide, I showed that around 30% of our time overall was spent on coverage analysis, but how did we figure that out? A lot of user interviews, but Fortunately, being in a services business, we also are pretty good about time tracking. So one of the first things we did was actually go into our timesheet system and look through every build hour from the past year. And that's how we got to that 30% number. Is we know that a huge chunk of our time is being spent on coverage analysis specifically. So that was of the kind of non high value work, that was pretty close to the top of the list, and that seemed like a very good candidate for where we wanted to start to address this and automate this. So this is a bit of a look at the state of the union. I mentioned spreadsheets and manual charts and visualizations. This is what that looks like. There is obviously an appetite in trying to use and take advantage of tools that would make especially the visualization side easier. But here on the left, that is an extremely average standard type of visualization that we would deliver to a client. That's built in Looker Studio. It's built by hand. It's very janky. The data that gets in there is copied and pasted from spreadsheets every night. It's not automated. It's high effort. Every client has different requests for the type of data they might want to see. And so obviously this is valuable. Obviously this is something that people want to see at the end, but the work to get there is heavy and pretty inefficient. We also had folks within the company that had been experimenting, prototyping with low-code tools, things like Domo, things like that, to tie different data sources together. And again, we saw definitely some efficiency gains there, but ultimately this was something that was not completely identical for every client, still required a good amount of manual work, and prone to breakage, and still ultimately did require things like copying data around. So, not something that was write once and then get for free the rest of the time, which was something we wanted to improve. And then final point on the kind of exposition, how did we figure all this out? We did a lot of user interviews. And so if this is a problem that you're seeing in your business, whether or not it's a business you know well, I can't really overstate how valuable this was. So we came up with a pretty standardized set of questions around, what do you spend your most time on? What do you feel of the work that you're doing is the most enjoyable, the least enjoyable? Do you use any tools to automate that work? What are the limitations of those tools? And so we completed about 50 user interviews with various folks at all levels. And I think it is important in this exercise to bias towards the most junior folks, the folks that are doing the most on the ground individual contributor work. But we also did similar sessions with managers, with leadership, to try and understand both what they were spending their time on and their perspective of what their teams were spending their time on. And we came up with a kind of few big conclusions from that, which was, we have tools, they work, they don't work together. Like I mentioned, a lot of copying and pasting still going on. The most boring parts and the most exciting parts were all manual. So the most boring parts, again, being things like reading through an article to count the number of times my company was mentioned. Very manual process. Most exciting parts, maybe building these dashboards, writing these reports, putting this deck together that's going to be in front of the CEO the next day. Again, it's happening by hand and is as error-prone as any other human task. And a huge pressure overall on both time and accuracy. If we're sending somebody a daily or a weekly report that says, how is your business doing today, or how is your business doing this week, it goes out that night. It can't go out 3 days later. Even if it does have 1,000 articles from a new launch that you just did, that needs to be timely in order for that information to be useful. And accuracy as well. We see a lot of especially the written reports that we send out, These are the type of things that, maybe they get emailed to a communications director at the business or something, but they pretty quickly get forwarded to the CEO, to the board, to these very, very high-powered, high-leverage folks within the organization. And if you send somebody a document that summarizes how they're doing in the news and they click on the first link and it's a broken link or something like that, it's not going to reflect well on yourself. It's not going to reflect well on the stakeholders you are working with within the company. It's not going to bode well for your future relationship. And it's not to say that we were making these mistakes every single day, but even 1% of the time, if we sent a report with a dead link, we send a lot of reports. That's a pretty big problem for us. So kind of first up in this framework of approaches and goals that we had for building it is an idea that we're thinking of as being defensible goals. So what do we mean by defensibility? I think if you're kind of used to any type of planning process, you've probably thought about things on an effort versus impact type of scale. So, if you're considering a bunch of new projects, you probably want to bias towards ones that are either high impact, high effort, or maybe even better, low effort, high impact. You want to be in those quadrants where you're getting a lot of value from the work that you're doing. This is things that are actually going to move the needle in your business. And so, of course, analyzing all the opportunities for automation and using AI within this business, that was definitely top of mind. But we kind of thought about it on a third axis as well. And I was not brave enough to try and draw a three-dimensional graph here. But, not only the effort and the impact, but also, are we going to be uniquely positioned to do this well? Basically meaning, do we have domain expertise in this area or access to experts in this area that mean that we, incubated within this company, are more likely to succeed at building this than a random YC company or something like that? Are we going to do this better than the average person off the street? And then will this be commoditized before we get there? For anybody that's working with AI in your day-to-day job, you've seen the pace of development. The models are coming out every week at this point. The benchmarks are getting surpassed every day. And the product features within these are improving rapidly as well. We've seen OpenAI alone turn from a pretty simple chat interface into a pretty full-featured, deceptively full-featured tool, really, one that you can run a lot of your day-to-day work inside of if you set up these different integrations and tools and features within it. So if we're building something that takes advantage of AI, are we going to be able to build it before OpenAI or Google or somebody else just make this a feature within their product? And I think that's a question that, whether you're working on automating a legacy business or building something from scratch, if you're working in this AI industry, that's one that should be top of mind, is spending a lot of your time, let's say, building a 30% better interface for the chat with your language model or something. It's quite likely that, if you have a team of a few people doing that, then OpenAI's team of 1,000 is going to steamroll you before you're done. We also thought about what is the current generation of AI good at. We've seen, obviously, there's a lot of interesting things happening on the forefront of generative media stuff, images, videos, things like that. Not super relevant to our business. So what we focused on is language models. Again, a lot of written communication in our world. And I think we all have a pretty good sense at this point of what these language models are good at. They're really good at summarizing text. If you put in a long essay and you ask for some key takeaways, it will happily give them to you. You could even ask it for Spark Notes for a full book, and you'll get something that's maybe not the most insightful, but you'll get bullet points that more or less reflect the content of a long piece of written content. It's quite good at extracting key information. So if you bury a sentence somewhere deep within an essay that has some nugget of wisdom, and you ask for that, it's quite likely that an AI model these days will be able to pull that out. It's also, and this one might be a little surprising, it's good at understanding local context, especially if you think of like translation use cases or something like that. We've seen, a pretty incredible evolution from a world of like Google Translate, which is a little bit better than a word for word, run it through a thesaurus type of approach, but it's not something that you'll get a nuanced, culturally relevant translation to every turn of phrase or every idiom that's used in a piece of content. And that's something that language models are pretty good at. So, if you're asking for key takeaways, then it's understanding might be a strong word, but it's parsing and considering the content of the full article or the full piece of text you send it before presenting that. And it's also, we've seen some good successes in pattern recognition, classification. There's these kind of embedding models that all these language models are built on that, that is what they're really good at, is given some type of thing, how closely associated is it with other things? And so as a kind of meta layer, a few steps on top of that, you can pretty accurately get classification, grouping, things like that from querying a language model. But there's also a bunch of stuff it's not great at. And if you've ever tried to create some long form content with ChatGPT, you've probably seen it feels pretty robotic, pretty samey, pretty quickly. There's AI detector tools out there that mixed bag of which heuristics they use to figure that out, but you'll see a lot of these like bad metaphors and overused words and the M dash thing that everybody's obsessed with now. There's these tells, and there's also, it just doesn't feel engaging. Like every sentence is the same length, and there's nothing really jumping out out of a long form piece of content that's AI generated. It's not great at high stakes decision making. We talked about understanding local context, but what the AI definitely does not understand is your business context. And so if you want to make an announcement about something that's happening in your world, but I know as the PR agency that the CEO really hates when we compare ourselves to this other competitor, that's not written down. That's not something that the language model will know. It doesn't know the fact that you just had a board meeting and that your finances are going this direction or whatever it is. It only understands the information you give it. And lastly, and I think we've probably all seen this as well, factual accuracy can be in question sometimes. So asking for information that is outside the scope of what you feed it in, you're very likely to get a guess. It's quite unlikely to say, hey, no, I don't know what you're asking. But it is quite likely that guess will be incorrect, depending on how far it has to extrapolate to get there. And so we kind of came up with this vision board. What do we want to build? What do we think that we can do given these constraints? Given what we're thinking about the development process, what do we think about the goals within the business that we feel like can be automated? And so again, we really focused on this coverage analysis, coverage tracking, coverage reporting type of world. And the goals that we came up with within that are, first, structured data. Again, we've got a lot of spreadsheets, and typically those spreadsheets are just kind of floating in space, unconnected to anything else, shared with two random people from two different teams. There's no central data warehouse or something, no repository of this data. And we produce a lot of data. We have hundreds of clients that are getting hundreds of thousands of news articles every month. And again, these float around in a spreadsheet and then get discarded and lost. So we felt like pretty fundamentally there was a business advantage, there was leverage we could create by hanging on to that data. And that was a big goal. Obviously, we talked about the inefficiencies within the process, so we want to automate those. We want to make sure that those are as straightforward as possible in the ways that don't need human creativity to do right. If it's just counting something in an article, why are we doing that by hand? That's something that we can do better. Getting insight from the data. So we talked about the Looker dashboards and stuff like that. There are for sure always going to be some metrics that are client specific, that are bespoke to a certain project, but there's a lot of them that are not. What is my share of voice on this topic? How am I positioned relative to my competitors? Yeah, how much of the industry news mentions me, etc. Like these are insights that pretty much everybody wants, and we're recreating them time and time again. So these are things we want to give every customer for free automatically. Less error-prone work. We talked about the risks of typos and mistakes and things like that. So we certainly want to get to a world where those are minimized and that we can hopefully get most things right the first time. And then finally, a big focus, probably the primary focus, is automating work and helping to augment the human team that's doing these tasks already. But as a business that is suffering these headwinds from the decline of traditional news media, how can we unlock new revenue streams for the business? Can we pull in coverage that we were not getting before? Can we do things at a scale that was not possible when we had to track every single thing by hand? And even can we offer additional services? Maybe it just wasn't feasible up until now to send a daily report of your news or something like that. Like, these are things that we can now speed up. These are things that we can now offer. These are things that we can now charge our clients more money for. And so finally getting into the actual development piece. And these are kind of the principles we laid out and why, in hindsight, that we feel like this approach has been successful. So if you are in a space where you're considering building, incubating, using AI within your business, especially to transform something that has not traditionally been an AI or data-based business, these are some things that we felt worked pretty well for us. So firstly, and this is a big one and maybe a controversial one, an internal team and a small team. I think we all kind of know that the bigger the team gets, the more communication is involved, the slower you are to make decisions, the slower you are to iterate. We wanted to be a small team. We started off as a very small team. And that was, we're thinking of it like a product incubator within this company. We had a combination of new hires, including myself, and repurposing some existing staff. But probably most importantly, and again, maybe controversially, like, this was not an outsourced project. This was not something where we brought in an AI agency and said, hey, can you fix our business for us? This was folks that were embedded within the company, that were working on this for the long haul, that were incentivized to get this right, not just to complete a project and check something off a checklist. And that really were working side by side with the folks whose jobs we were hopefully going to speed up in the future. We built a bit of an advisory panel within the company. So we found, within each team, there was usually somebody that was kind of had the biggest appetite for this type of thing already, whether it's just using ChatGPT to speed up some piece of their work or staying on top of the latest trends here. Basically somebody that was hungry for change, somebody who recognized the inefficiencies in the work that they were doing and their colleagues were doing. And so of those folks, we wanted them to be an active part of the development lifecycle. So we put together this kind of advisory panel. We met every couple of weeks and kind of presented our progress, got feedback, and helped to kind of triage the long list of feedback and ideas and suggestions we got from the rest of the business. So it was very, very valuable, again, as somebody coming in new to this industry, to have a strong team of folks to help us filter out, like, this is my pet project idea versus, like, this is something that will fundamentally transform the work I do for the better. Again, we're a small team, so we wanted to focus on fewer, better features. We were not trying to build the next Oracle type, platform. We're not trying to solve every problem within your business under one roof. We were trying to solve a couple of the key points that we identified earlier, the inefficiencies within coverage tracking, the inefficiencies within creating these dashboards, creating these reports. So we get a dozen feature requests a day for, can we expand to do this other thing? And eventually, yes, in long enough time horizon, yes. But for the foreseeable future, we want to get these things completely right before we expand the scope there. And that means, we're going to start by improving, augmenting some piece of the business, but our work is not going to be done there. And we're not overnight going to go from a fully hands-on manual business to one that is on rails and automated. And that's okay. I mentioned before that this was not an open-ended R&D project. It couldn't be. And so from the beginning, we set some clearly defined goals. And for us, those were those tasks I mentioned, speeding up those bits of the business that we felt like were slowest and the biggest time suck. We obviously, as I mentioned with the advisory panel, we had a pretty good feedback loop within the company, but we also, as we started to deliver some of these features to customers, focused on keeping a tight feedback loop with them as well. We were talking to customers every day. The client teams that are working with them are talking to customers every day. We wanted them to feel involved in the development process. And finally, and probably the most difficult to pull off, was a top-down mandate for change. Fortunately, we were lucky enough to be in a business where the CEO had brought in this new team to say, hey, we see what's happening here. Like, we see those big coverage in the news about how the communications industry isn't going to exist in a few years' time. Like, we know we need to fix this. We know that this is sink or swim type situation. The main benefit from that was the belief and the adoption from the rest of the organization in what we're doing. I think it would have been possible to pull off without that, but it was very valuable that we could kind of build this thing and then hear a pretty strong signal from the leadership team that this was something we all had to try and give feedback on. And then finally, shipping quickly and repeating. So again, I think this is one we all probably know pretty well, but as soon as we kind of got something that was working and that was fixing some of these issues, we delivered it and gathered the feedback, as I was saying, and continued to incrementally deliver value rather than saving up for 6 months and just solving every problem all at once. There's a problem with that, though, which is this is not an industry that is really familiar with the concept of an MVP. This is one that is used to battle-tested tools. This is one that's used to, we have this big enterprise thing. We have this, whether it's for media monitoring or whether it's Google Sheets or something like that. We have this thing that has had the bugs ironed out for 20 years straight. And if something goes wrong, we're going to start complaining. So that was, that was definitely a bit of a surprise. It sounds very obvious, but it was not something that we really anticipated, was the fact that an incomplete product or a product that sold a vision that was a few % larger than what we delivered at first was not always going to be well received. And so we learned pretty quickly, no more over-promising and under-delivering. Like, really make sure that every single thing within the product is tightly polished, is working completely correctly. Don't hint at the next thing until it's done. Stop showing designs before they exist. These types of things that really were working against us ultimately. This one is more of a pet peeve of mine, but nobody reads anything ever. If you send somebody a long kind of explanatory document, they've got other work to do. They're busy. They're not going to read it. They're going to maybe skim the first sentence and tell you that they read it. So every single time we found that written documentation, written explanation were not valuable in driving adoption within the business. It's not the most scalable thing in the world, but we have done hundreds and hundreds of demos with internal folks, with customers, to really show them what it is that we're building, why it's useful to them, give them that aha moment without them having to read a full document. And finally, there's a difference between the best ideas and the best explained ideas, and it's quite related to the above, but delivering something that should fix something. Writing a one-line message in Slack about it is not sufficient. You really have to handhold people through, this is what this is why we built this is why this is valuable. And here's the end result. So we kind of took that very old school spreadsheet and turned it into an actual product. So this is kind of the dashboard view within it. We pull in all this coverage. We scrape the whole internet looking for news coverage. No more manual searching. Comes into an inbox. You triage it. You as a human is seeing this list. And if it's interesting, we pull dozens and dozens of data points that you can kind of see on the right-hand side there. Like who was mentioned. I guess it's hard to read on this screen, but is it relevant to your brand? Where are the key topics I care about mentioned? And there's also one interesting thing. Again, I can't quite see it up there, but one thing that we just simply couldn't do manually is readership. So we have an API integration with a data provider that gives us the actual viewership number from a lot of major news outlets. So no more of like reach estimates or guesses, but real data. And again, that's something that just was not feasible to do by hand. When you track something, again, we've pulled all these data points. We can give you these insights. That was another big goal, was like these insights for free. We can create a dashboard live from the moment you sign up, use it on your phone, get this in the palm of your hand. And the written reports as well. So based on all of that, we can summarize. We are summarizing all these articles. We can give you a paragraph of summary about how you've done in the news, key themes. We can do this every single day. And there, this looks like a lot of output here, but like fundamentally the hard thing here is not like crafting the perfect prompt or something. It is getting that data in a structured form. It is getting your business information in a way that you can feasibly put it through this workflow. And last of all, again, I mentioned there's always going to be custom metrics, but owning this data, having this in a centralized repository means that our insights and analytics team can do their job better than ever. So integrate with their existing tools, dig into this, create business insight, create customer insight in a way that, again, was a whole lot of spreadsheets before and basically infeasible. So this is the framework we followed. Again, embedding deeply within the team, setting defensible goals, things that we feel like we're best positioned to do, and delivering value as quickly as possible, and repeating. So I hope some of that may have been relevant to even folks outside of the PR industry, and happy to chat with anybody that might feel that way. I think we're just about out of time for the session, but feel free to come grab me, and I'm happy to talk.